Hi, grade 11s. I'm starting to read from where we left off on Monday on page 125, about 3 lines from the top. "Little Chief," he yelled, and pounded on the boards. On his next pass, Stu Little Chief headed for the bench. When he was 3 feet away, I hurtled over the boards and into the game. As soon as my skates hit the ice, I knew exactly what to do. I burst down the right side and followed the puck deep into their end. Their defensemen scooped the puck off the boards and cut behind their net. The rest of them banked like fighter planes. That's what I was counting on. I could see that the Chiefs' first pass would be a hard, flat one to their other defender halfway to the blue line. From there, it was supposed to go across ice behind our retreating forwards to their left winger, who would tap it directly into open ice. Their center would pick it up at full speed and head up ice. But they never got that chance. I was out of the defenseman's range of vision, and when he sent out the first pass, I cut in off the wing, where I coasted. I was blazing when the cross-ice pass was made, and I snared it at their blue line. I heard the defenders yelp, and they both jumped up to counter. I turned hard on the outside edge of my blades, pulled the puck around on my backhand, and cut straight across in front of them. Fast. They had to come together, and when they did, I cut the other way and swept into clear ice near the far face-off circle. They couldn't catch me. I straightened up 15 feet in front of the net, dipped my shoulders, wriggled my hips, and changed direction 3 times before lifting the puck over the sprawled goalie. 5-1. I barely went to the bench after that. The only rest I got was between periods, and by the time we came out for the final frame, it was 5-4 for the Chiefs. By then, they were keying on me, which opened up the ice for the rest of our guys. But they were a strong and disciplined team. Even when 2 of them took me out against the boards, the other 3 skaters maintained control of their territory. My teammates played hard, but the experience of the Kapuskasing kept us at bay. They knew how to play puck control, and they iced the puck a lot to force face-offs. Time was wearing down. My energy began to flag. I signaled to Virgil with 7 minutes left and took a seat on the bench. I squirted water over my head from a plastic bottle and wiped it off with a towel. The Chiefs and their crowd could smell victory, and the noise was tremendous. None of us had ever been in such a ruckus atmosphere. When our players came to the bench, I could see fear on their faces. The tension was huge. This loss would be enormous, and I closed my eyes and breathed, drawing all my energy to a sharp point of focus. I felt lifted suddenly, borne upward and out of my tired body, and the air was suddenly clearer in my lungs. I waved a glove at a passing player, and he whirled to the bench, and I was back into the flow of the game. I stole the puck off a Chief player's stick at their blue line and whirled and snapped a bullet of a pass right onto Virgil's stick. The goalie slid across the crease with his pads stacked together. Virgil calmly lifted the puck over him. Tie game. 5 minutes left, and I was flying now. Every time the Chiefs tried to rush, I broke it up. Every time they worked to organize themselves, I would rag the puck in a wild game of keep away until their attack fizzled. The crowd shouted at them to hit me, but I was too fast. I spun and danced and looped the loop like a daredevil. I skated like I had never skated before. I made seemingly impossible passes. I made moves that made the crowd roar. Then, with less than a minute remaining, I poke-checked the puck off a Chief defenseman's stick. It squirted out into the open, and I flashed past him and scooped it up with one hand on my stick. I pumped hard with the other and sped across center ice. The crowd stood and yelled at their team to stop me. I raised my eyes to look ahead. Their goalie was backing slowly toward the net. The Moose were all yelling from our bench, and that's when time slowed. I could hear the slice of my blades. I could hear my own breathing. I zoomed across the blue line, but everything was all cottony and slow. The puck was pushed out ahead of me on the toe of the blade of my stick. My shoulders rolled as I sped in on goal. I could see the goalie squinting through the cage of his mask. When I was a dozen feet away, I dropped one shoulder in a broad feint. He didn't move. I faked a wrist shot. At the last second, I turned my stick and pulled the puck back in, at the same time turning sharply so I faced back up ice. The goalie had moved across the net with me. I saw Stu Little Chief skating in all alone on the opposite side of the net, and I hit him on the button with a hard pass. All he had to do was tap it into the empty side of the goal. I didn't see the Chiefs defenseman coming. He hit me hard, and I crashed into the boards. When I clambered to one knee, the moose piled on top of me. I was pummeled and punched in joy, and by the time we got untangled, the ice was littered with debris. The crowd was standing and cheering, and as I skated to our bench with 30 seconds left in the game, they cheered even louder. The ice crew cleared up the mess, and I sat on the bench as our guys controlled the puck after the face-off. The players on the bench stood as the time clicked away and then erupted over the boards when the klaxon sounded. I was too tired to move. Finally, the Chiefs lined up to shake our hands, and I made my way off the bench to join the ceremony. One by one, they gripped my hand and nodded. The crowd kept up their applause. We skated to our bench and were headed towards the dressing room when someone stopped me at the exit and told me I was the game's first star. I didn't understand. The first star, Virgil said. 3 stars, like Hockey Night in Canada. I'm not going back out there. You have to, it's tradition. I don't know if I like that tradition, I said. I guess you better start too if you're going to play like that. Then the announcer's voice boomed out across the arena. Introducing the game's 3 stars. Your first star from the Manitouwadge Moose, number 13, Saul Indian Horse. Indian Horse. I expected boos to rain down, but when I coasted out to take a turn around center ice, the applause and stamping feet sounded like rolling thunder around the arena. I looked up and everybody was standing, and when I raised my stick in appreciation, they cheered even louder. I skated to the bench, and Virgil was grinning at me. Better than a frickin' trophy anytime, eh? He said. It'll do, I said, and grinned. Can we go home now? Chapter 31 on page 129. That game with the Kapuskasing Chiefs took us out of our shelter. Word got out about the Indian team that had beat the Senior A champions, and everyone wanted to play us. I wasn't keen, and Fred shared my apprehension, but Virgil and the others were determined to take up the challenge. They think it's their game, I said. I found that out at the school. Virgil frowned. They play the game for the same reason we do, for the feeling. Far as I know, no one owns that. They think they do. Yeah, well, we'll see. Instead of our regular northern trips, we began traveling to towns dotted all along the Trans-Canada Highway, places we had heard of or passed through but never had a reason to stop in before. There were teams everywhere, all of them eager to take on the upstart Indians from Manitouwadge. We lost some games and we won our share, but there was less joy in these trips. A motel in Timmins was less inviting than our regular billets in Batchewana. The air in those arenas didn't move. You couldn't feel the wind off the lake cutting across the blue line or follow a honking flock of geese across the sky. There were no Indian kids chasing after the pucks that got flipped over the boards into the snow, no brown fingers clutching the chicken wire behind the net. Zambonis replaced the gangs of people in gumboots and mackinaws hosing down the ice. Now the norm was rows of red seats, electronic scoreboards, junk food in styrofoam boxes, and the jagged sound of English in the taunts and put-downs from the crowds. This ice is crap, I complained to Virgil. On outdoor ice, you really gotta know how to skate. It's arena ice, he said, same everywhere. Well, that's what I mean. The ice in Heron Bay was rough where the wind cut through the black spruce and made ripples and ridges. It was uneven because the ground slanted up from one end. We had to know that, had to use it in our game. Well, this makes it easier. Easier ain't better, it's just easier. We played almost every week in another town. The games were always events, mostly because people were curious to see if Indians could really skate, if we could play the game right. Although I didn't want to be there, I took it as my personal responsibility to show them. The white players tried to rough me up, but I used my speed to leave them behind. They speared me, elbowed me, slashed me, head-butted me, but I always found the open ice I needed to make another play, to create magic out of mayhem. The rest of the Moose fought for me. I could shrug off a cheap hit in favor of a better opportunity, but my teammates resented the way I was treated. They resented the cold, inhospitable way we were all treated. For them, the game had always been gentlemanly, rough and hard for certain, but clean, and the reserve teams and the communities that spawned them had been like family. Now there were out-and-out brawls. Once, when I got laid out after a crushing hit from behind, they streamed off our bench, and the fight that ensued was horrific. It took the referees a full 20 minutes to get things calmed down. Once the penalties were sorted out, both teams were left with 4 forwards, a pair of defensemen, and a goalie. The crowd was rabid. Garbage rained down on us. A group of them pissed and shat in our dressing room. The tires were slashed on the vans. No one spoke after that game, which we lost by 2 goals. My teammates carried that resentment with them, and the games we played after were tougher and harder, more bitterly fought, and once, in Hearst, when things again got out of control and blood spewed in an epic team fight in the third period, they refused to line up for the handshakes at the end of the game. They grew vengeful, and no cheap shot went unpaid with fists. It saddened me. The Moose went from jubilant Boyd to hard, taciturn men in no time at all. But as long as we kept winning our share, none of them ventured a suggestion that we return to the way it had been. It drove me to even deeper focus. I worked deliberately at getting that keen sense of vision to alight me on me faster. I wanted to spare my team the indignity of a brawl. I wanted to keep the spirit of the game instilled in them and let them play with the freedom and abandon they once had. So I worked hard at learning to connect to that vision. It started to take me less and less time to read those teams. The players had all grown up the same way, with the same kind of coaching, the same perceptions of the game. Their ideas of flow and movement were restricted by the predictable nature of their coaching, and they seldom took the risk of breaking out of the standard mode of play. I saw that and took advantage of it. Soon we'd left the bush circuit behind altogether, and we were invited to play in big money tournaments everywhere. We earned enough our first winter out to buy new uniforms. Everyone was excited. Then we ran into the black heart of Northern Ontario in the 1960s, and we were hated. Hated. There's no other word for it. The Moose came out of the bush as a team that wanted to prove itself again, the best competition around. We arrived in those towns as hockey players expecting to play a square game, stick to stick, end to end, fair and equal. But they only ever saw us as Indians. They only ever saw brown faces where white ones should have been. We were an unwelcome entity in their midst, and we won it. And when we won it, it only made things worse. Chapleau was a mill town east of Wawa, and the tournament there drew teams from as far away as Timmins and Sudbury. A lot of pride was on the line. The games were scrappy and tough, and it took everything we had to wrest the championship game from the Sault Ste. Marie team. But we did it. It was a long drive back to Manitouwadge, and the boys all had to work the next day, so we decided to spend some of our winnings on a meal in Devon, a small town outside of Chapleau. There wasn't much to the place, but the cafe and a hotel looked okay. When we walked through the door, we could see another door that led to a bar. Whenever the door swung open, we could hear the sound of a jukebox and the laughter of men. We were the only ones in the cafe. We took 4 tables by the window overlooking the street. The waitress took our orders, and we were recounting the game highlights and laughing when a man entered. He took a long look at us before retreating into the bar. None of us gave it a thought. Then the music from the jukebox stopped. I looked up to see a line of men entering the cafe from the bar. They were working men, big and strong-looking, with stern faces. Several of them sat on stools and spun around on them to face us. The rest stood around our tables. There were 8 of them. "You boys got kind of big for the britches," a swarthy tall man said, and leaned one hand on the table where Virgil and I sat. "No idea what you mean," Virgil said. He kept his face neutral. "Well, you win a little hockey tournament, and then you think you got the right to come in here and eat like white people," the man said. "We're only here to eat. We didn't set out to copy anybody," Virgil said. "Don't get cute with me, boy." Virgil pushed his chair back and stood up. "Boy?" he asked. "How big do they grow men where you come from?" The man sneered. "Plenty bigger than you." "Just what the hell do you want?" "Well, the thing is, you gotta earn the right to eat here. We pay just like everybody else. We don't eat with Indians." "I don't recall asking you to join us," Virgil said. The man smiled. Then he reached out and clamped a hand on Virgil's shoulder. "It's not your place to ask us anything. You want to eat here? You gotta fight for it." "What are you talking about?" "Well, whenever we get Indians uppity enough to want to eat here, we take them outside to a little place in the alley out back we call Moccasin Square Garden. You walk back in here from the garden, and you can eat all you want. So we're going to march you out there one at a time. See who's man enough to make it back." "Sounds fun." Virgil reached down and took a drink of water, then placed the glass back on the table. "You first," the man said to him. "Save my spot, Saul. I'll be right back." The line of men walked Virgil out and 3 more stepped from the door of the bar to block our passage. They had axe handles in their hands. We sat there in shock, not knowing what to do. The waitress and the cook stood together in the kitchen, murmuring to each other. There was the sound of slushy traffic from the street. A police car slid by, and we flicked looks at each other. The team sat ramrod straight in our chairs. They walked Virgil back in. He was bloody around the mouth, and there was a cut on his temple. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand as he sat down and stared at his hands, which he'd folded on the table. Then they walked another of us out. For the next 20 minutes, they came in and took one member of the moose after another. Each time they brought another back, the smell of urine got stronger. When only I was left, the tall man leaned on our table. "You play a hell of a game, little star," he said. "That and the fact that you're a kid gives you a pass. But remember your place. Next time, somewhere else, you might not get so lucky." He blew a kiss to everyone at our table and then turned and walked away. The other men strode out behind him. As they entered the bar, the jukebox jumped back to life and we heard a lot of laughter and the clinking of glasses. I sat there looking around at my teammates' faces. None of them moved. They were all staring at the table in front of them. They'd been beaten. Not severely. They weren't injured enough to require a hospital, but they were cut and hurt, and I could feel their brokenness. Virgil cleared his throat and stood up. "Let's go," he said. We filed out silently and climbed into the van. Virgil motioned for me to join him in the front seat. We pulled out into the street and found the highway again. No one said a word. The smell of urine and spit was high in the air. Someone lit a cigarette, and the acrid bite of the smoke was a relief. Virgil drove steadily west along the road that would take us home. Darkness fell. We drove in silence. There was no sound for miles except the hum of the wheels beneath us. We'd driven for hours before Virgil spoke. When he did, it was only 5 words. 5 words that scared me and angered me at the same time. "They pissed on us, Saul." The miles flew by, and now and then we could hear a cough from the back of the van and the rustle of bodies trying to sleep. As we passed White River around midnight, he told me what had happened. When I got out back, they circled me. The first one came at me, and we got into it, but all he did was push me back, and someone else grabbed me and spun me around, and I got punched in the face. Then someone else grabbed me and gave me another shot. They pushed me all around that circle, punching and kicking, and when I fell to the ground dizzy, one of them stood over me and pissed on me. It was the same for all of us. I sat there without a clue about what to say. After a few more miles, he spoke again. But you know what the scariest thing was, Saul? There was no yelling, no cussing, no nothing. They did it silently, like it was an everyday thing. I never knew people could be that cold. "They hate us because we won?" I asked finally. "They hate us because we're skins. We didn't do anything. We crossed a line, their line. They figure they got the right to make us pay for that." "Do they?" "I don't know," he said. "Sometimes I think so." "Virgil?" "Yeah." "I won't say nothing." "Good," he said. "None of us will." And we never did. But there were moments when you'd catch another boy's eye and know that you were both thinking about it. Everything was contained in that glance. All the hurt, all the shame, all the rage. The white people thought it was their game. They thought it was their world. Chapter 32, page 137. I started to notice things after that. I started to see a line in every arena we played in. It showed itself as a stretch of empty seats that separated the Indian fans from the white ones. Police were stationed at the separate entrance they shunted our people through. I saw that a lot of players on the opposing teams would not remove their hockey gloves to shake our hands after a game. Some of them didn't even leave the bench. While I mentioned it to Virgil, he scowled. "White ice, white players," he said. "Honky night in Canada." The Moose were invited to play in a town called Espanola. It was a long drive, but their team, the Lumber Kings, were repeat champions. Several former members had graduated to Major Junior A, and a handful had even gone on to play in the National Hockey League. They were a team with a pedigree, and only the best teams got invited to Espanola's annual tournament. The tournament had never had a native team before, and despite some misgivings, Virgil convinced us to make the trip. "We win this thing, and we've got enough for a down payment on a team bus," he said. "Let's show them that we can do it." The Moose were a known team by then, and when we piled out of our vans at the arena in Espanola, I could feel the eyes on us. "Which one's the whiz kid?" I heard someone ask. "Gotta be the big guy." "Nah, I bet he's the tall one with the big hands." As we skated onto the ice for our game against the North Bay Nuggets, the crowd booed us. When our lineup was introduced, they knew suddenly where to direct their energy. "Hey, Indian horse, 13's got to be real unlucky for you. You guys are going to need an Indian hearse to get out of here. We're taking your scalps, Chief." Once we settled on our bench, Virgil looked at me and grinned, trying to keep his spirits up. "They warmed up to you real fast," he said. "The Indianhurst thing was pretty good." The North Bay team was exciting to watch. You could tell that they were well coached by the disciplined way they moved the puck. Fred Kelly seldom made a road trip because of his work schedule, and I found myself wishing for his presence right then. No one on the North Bay team took unnecessary chances. They played the game efficiently, and nobody held onto the puck for long. I was impressed as I studied their game. They weren't afraid to halt the flow and turn their rush back when it wasn't shaping up. Their defense was solid, if unspectacular. They were the stay-at-home variety who kept their heads and passed cleanly. Nuggets could really skate, too. Our guys looked awkward compared to them. Not long into the game, they scored a pair of goals on us. Virgil slumped down beside me on the bench and elbowed me in the ribs. "You scared of these guys or what?" he asked. "They're good." "Yeah, well, anytime you feel like helping out." I nodded. I watched a few minutes longer, and when one of their rushes broke down at our blue line and they turned the puck back to their trailing defenseman, I had the knowledge I needed. I raised my stick as Virgil skated by. He turned to the bench immediately, and I leapt over the boards. I burst in across our blue line to a tangle along the boards and tapped the puck loose. It skimmed out to one of their players, and I was on him in a flash. There was no sound from my skates, so I surprised him. He flipped a hurried pass into the middle. Our defense ate it up, and we started up ice. When they assembled to stave off our attack, I turned and skated as fast as I could along the right wing, ignoring the puck. I saw their defense tighten nervously as I flew across center ice. They moved toward me, but I cut hard back toward the play, passing our rushing left winger in a blur. He left the puck for me, and I scooped it and flew across our blue line in a long, sweeping turn. I could feel the air whip by my face, and my jersey flapped. The crowd was on their feet. I'd never skated so fast. When I met their forwards coming back toward me, I did a crazy loop-the-loop around their center and another one in the opposite direction by their left winger. I pulled the defense to me again as I crossed the blue line and made a nifty drop pass between my legs. Joe Eaglechief, our right winger, picked it up all alone and scored on a wrist shot. I'd never heard such noise, cheers mixed with boos and a crazed stomping of feet. A flurry of empty cups landed on the ice as I skated to the bench. "They play clean, but high speed disrupts them," I huffed to Virgil. He thumped me on the back, then whispered to our guys along the bench. From then on, we picked up the intensity on every shift. I played 40 minutes of that game. I was drenched in sweat. My gear felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I scored 4 times, and we won it going away, 7-4. Half of their team refused to come out for the handshake. When we returned the next morning to play the Owen Sound Clippers, the arena was packed. Like before, the crowd was noisy. The Clippers were a hard-skating, workmanlike team, known for their toughness. They were the biggest team we'd ever faced, too, and when I lined up for the face-off against their number 1 center, he loomed over me. "Watch your head, squirt," he said. Maybe I should have registered those words as ominous. Maybe I should have been able to read what was coming, discerned intent from the vicious way he slapped my stick before the puck was dropped. But I didn't. What tipped me off first was the hard cross-check I took across the back when I went into the corner after the puck. It was so hard that I lost my footing and tumbled into the boards. I heard laughter from the seats. My helmet had slipped over my eyes, and when I stood up and raised my glove to lift it, someone slashed my skates out from under me, and I fell again. I heard more laughter, and people were slapping the glass above me. The play had moved down ice by the time I got up, and I had to chase it. The hits came regular after that. Every player on the Clippers slammed into me whenever they could. I was slashed repeatedly from behind. I was cross-checked, tripped, held, and elbowed. When someone pushed my face into the glass with his forearm, I spun on my skates. My helmet fell off, and I was standing toe-to-toe with the tall center. He flipped his gloves off, spread his skates wide, raised his fist, and scowled at me. "What are you going to do, squaw hopper?" he asked. I looked over at our bench. Virgil was standing there looking at me. As I bent to retrieve my helmet, the boos rained down from the stands. There was clutter strewn all over the ice. The crowd was rabid. Back on the bench, I slumped down and took a long swig from the water bottle. I could feel my teammates all looking at me. I stared at my feet. "You don't gotta take the cheap stuff, Saul," Eaglechief said. "Hit the fuckers back." "It's not my game," I said. "Well, it's starting to look like it better be." When I went off for my next shift, the crowd was on me right away. "Hey, it's Chief Chicken. Injun's supposed to wear war paint, not makeup." Hit him with your purse, Indian horse. As I leaned in for the face-off, their center blew me a kiss. Pussy, he sneered. He slashed the stick out of my hands when the puck was dropped. When I skated away, he raised his hands to the crowd and they roared. They kept at me all through the game, and when it was over, I was covered in welts and bruises. And we lost. That hurt far more. I sat in the dressing room holding ice to the most painful areas. Tough guys, Virgil said. We could have won, I said. Well, it's hard when they won't let you skate. Where the hell were the refs? You sound like a whiner. Hey, you saw how they played me. Yeah, I saw. I saw how you reacted, too. You think I'm chicken? I think you're scared, yeah. I would be if I was your size. There's some big boys in this tournament. It ain't gonna get any easier now that they know how to slow you down. Virgil was right. It didn't get any easier. It got worse. Every team we faced after that sent their biggest and toughest out against me. They sent their finesse players out against our other lines so that when my teammates tried to hand out a measure of punishment, they were penalized and played shorthanded a lot of the time. The Moose struggled. My body was sore. My thighs had been slashed so many times I could feel the beginnings of a Charlie horse. When we came out for our last game, a game we had to win to stay in the tournament, I didn't know if I had it in me. For the first time that I could remember, I couldn't find the vision. I couldn't seem to read the play, and I felt hopeless. I felt like a loser. On my first shift in the game, I was skated hard into the boards by both opposing defensemen and had my head rubbed into the glass for extra measure. When I turned, the biggest of them pushed me in the chest, and I fell back into the boards. He waited as I gathered myself, settled my helmet square on my head, and skated away. He spat at my feet as the crowd booed lustily. When I finished that shift, I came back to our bench and tilted my head up to squirt water from my water bottle onto my face. That's when I felt it. Spittle. It rained down from the seats behind us, and I heard them calling me names and beating against the glass. When I turned around, I came face to face with a boy who must have been about 9. He spit against the glass. Chicken, he mouthed. The man standing beside him squeezed his shoulder. By now, the whole crowd was on its feet and gesturing toward our bench. When the ref had whistled the game down, he skated to the PA announcer. It took a full 5 minutes for the crowd to settle down. While they cleaned the garbage off the ice, we went to our dressing room. I sat with my head down, and no one said a word. When I looked around, no one would meet my eye. There are times in this world when you have to look hard at yourself. The challenge you feel is the one that burns in your gut. I knew my team wanted me to buckle. They wanted me to bare my fists and fight. But I would not do that. I would not surrender my vision of the game. I would not let go of my dream of it, the freedom, the release it gave me, the joy the game gave me. It wasn't anybody else's game to take away from me. Father Le Boutillier had said that it was God's game. I had no head for that idea, but I knew for a fact that the game was my life. I sat there in that horrible silence and I smoldered. I raged, and when the referee knocked on the door, I stood up with the others to head back to the ice. I clomped with them down the hallway, and when I got to the bench, I turned and looked at the crowd. I raised my stick to them, and I stepped out onto the ice and reclaimed the game. There wasn't one of those players who could skate with me.